So today's topic is Emerson, an American Vedantin. If you read the classical works on history of philosophy and mysticism, you find two phenomena. There are certain instances where during the same time, same age, in different countries, in different cultures, great thinkers emerge with identical thought currents, identical thought systems. One example is, for instance, the period of Thales in ancient Greece in the 7th century, and some of the later Sankhya philosophical systems which emerged in India around the same period. But there are certain other instances where mystical and philosophical ideas get transferred during the course of interactions between cultures and philosophical systems, sometimes over several centuries. After a long gap of several centuries, ideas find echoes and reflections in distant lands and in diverse cultural traditions. I'm coming to Emerson now. Now, Emerson was born in the year 1803 in America, a nation which was altogether a new experiment as a socio-economic political experiment, as a movement of non-conformity, informality, breaking off from the old traditional conservative feudal traditions of Europe. And Emerson was born at a time and in an age, in a society where most of the people were so engrossed, concerned with the realities of everyday life. That's why Emerson himself once wrote that knowledge to be effective in the United States has to be domesticated as a servant of pragmatism. Even the highest mystical ideas, philosophical ideas, metaphysical ideas, to be relevant, should have some kind of gross utilitarian usefulness, pure utility, cutthroat pragmatism. That's what he actually thought about in those days. That is true because the nation was emerging, it was expanding. It was slowly expanding westward, exploring new landscapes, rivers, mountains, and natural resources. So people were busy with building up their everyday life. So that's why he said, knowledge has to be domesticated. Even a great philosophical or mystical, metaphysical idea will have to be linked to some kind of utilitarian, pragmatic usefulness in everyday life of individuals and society. Now, mysticism of the type which Emerson evolved begins to grow the moment you remove from your mind the very idea of utility or practical usefulness. Unless we are able to break the link between a great idea and its practical value in our everyday life, we cannot become philosophers. To what extent this idea will help me to make a few more dollars, to buy more expensive wines, to live in more expensive hotels. That is the criterion for judging the value of a philosophical idea. Then it is called a domestication, or reducing a great philosophical ideal down to the level of practical utility. That's a death of philosophy, death of mysticism. So Emerson was born and lived and thought and wrote and lectured in an age when utilitarianism, pragmatism was the fundamental criterion for judging anything, including the highest mystical ideas. Now, how do we link Vedanta with Emerson? That's the next stage. Now you find right from 5th century onwards, 5th century BC onwards, there was some kind of relationship, link between Upanishadic and Vedantic ideas and ancient Greece. After the Western cultural heritage became Roman cultural heritage, when it lost its direct link to Greece, this link was severed after the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, after the conversion of Constantine, and after the emergence of Augustinian theology. But right till the time of Plotinus, from 5th or 6th century BC, that's the time of Pythagoras, Parmenides, and later Plato also, right to the 2nd century AD, there was close link between the Upanishadic and Vedantic ideas of the East and ancient Greece, the West. After the conversion of Constantine, after the introduction of Augustinian theology, philosophy practically died in Europe. But this link was broken. Then it was re-established, or the beginning of this re-establishment began in 1560-67, that period, when a Muslim emperor, whose name is Rara Shikoh, who was a Sufi, not a fundamental Muslim. He was a great Sufi, and he used to encourage interfaith dialogues involving Portuguese missionaries who had reached Goa, Sufis, and also Hindu and Buddhist scholars in his court in Delhi. So he arranged for the translation of 50 of the ancient Upanishads, which are the canonical literature of Vedanta philosophy, into Persian. He assembled a panel of Sanskrit scholars in Delhi and got these 50 Upanishads translated into Persian, which were translated again into Latin in maybe 1801 by a great French scholar, Antoine Duperreau, who came to India and who acquired first-hand knowledge and information about the Vedantic scriptures, Vedanta philosophy. He sat at the feet of Vedic scholars and studied Vedanta. Now, his name was Antoine Duperreau. He traveled all over India with the help of East India Company and made intensive and extensive study of Vedanta philosophy. And he translated these 50 Upanishads from the Persian version into Latin, which caught the attention of Schopenhauer, and who started writing articles in German journals expounding Upanishadic philosophy. And it is said that from 1830s onwards, Emerson started referring to Hindu ideas like cyclicism, that means birth, death, rebirth, and this continuity of human existence. Law of karma, which he called compensation in his own language. And also the idea that behind this changing body, there is a changeless Atman. You should remember the first stanza in his famous poem Brahma is actually a literal translation of a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, 19th verse of 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. You find almost a literal translation in Brahma. If the red slayer think he slays, or if the slain think he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways I keep and pass and turn again. This is the verse. It is the 19th verse of Bhagavad Gita. The meaning is this: if anyone thinks that by killing somebody he is a killer, the slayer, or if anyone thinks that when he is killed, he is being killed, he doesn't know the truth. Of course, he says, they know not well the subtle ways. Gita sloka is, Ye enam veti khandaram, yaschainam manyate khadam, ubhau tau na vijanito, nayam khanti na hanyate. I am here means this reality, which is not the body, this Atman. So the idea there is an imperishable, an eternal reality behind and beyond this body, which is the only eternal reality, which continues to exist even after death, and which is not involved in any action involving the 5 senses of perception and 5 senses of action. This Atman is eternal, imperishable, changeless reality, which is not directly involved in any kind of action. It is neither the actor nor the object of action. This verse from the Gita must have been composed around 3326 BC. That's a period fixed for Bhagavad Gita. And you find in Brahma, which Emerson wrote maybe in the year 1856. It was published in 1857 in Atlantic Monthly, but he wrote that poem in 1856. If the red slayer think he slays, or if the slain think he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways I keep and pass and turn again. In his essays on nature, he talks about his pantheistic views. He talks about the continued existence of one trans-empirical eternal reality. Now I'm coming back to the historical link. I shall read the commentary of Shankaracharya, which comes with some of the ideas of which come very close to some of his essays which Emerson wrote. Ya enam iti yaha enam pragadam dehinam veti vijanati hantaram hanana kriyaha kartaram yascha enam anyaha manyate hadam deha hananena hata aham iti hanana kriyayaha karma bhutam tau ubhau na vijanitaha na jatavantu avivekena atmanam hanta aham had asmi aham idi deha hananena atmanam aham pratyaya vishayam yo vijanitaha tau Atmaswarupa anabhignyo ityarthaga yasma na ayam atma handi na hanana kriyayaha karta bhavati na hanyade na cha karma bhavati ityarthaga avikriyatva. Avikriyatva means because it is eternal, imperishable, immortal. The same idea you find in Emerson's later verses. For God to me is near, shadow and sunlight are the same. The vanished gods to me appear, and one to me are shame and fame. I refer to Schopenhauer's translation of the Upanishads, his articles which he wrote in German based on his understanding of the Latin translation, of a Persian translation of the Upanishads. Remember that. the Persian translation which came in 1566-67, the Latin translation 1801, and Schopenhauer happens to read it, and he wrote articles. Some of them were republished in Atlantic Weekly, which caught the attention of Emerson. The second verse is something very important. If you read the commentators, the great scholars who have made study of this great poem, you find they talk about the mysterious, sublime combination of paradoxes. How can you say that you are doing everything, still you are beyond action? When a person is killed, how can you say he is not killed? How can, and in Emerson's further essays on oversoul, nature, he talks about an absolute reality which cannot be called existence in the empirical sense or non-existence in its trans-empirical absolute sense. In the Nasadiya Sukta, which is possibly, which is much older than the Upanishads, comes to Rigveda Samhita, 10th Mantala, Nasadasi, Nosadasi, Tadanim. The Nasadiya Sukta speaks about the ultimate original cause of the universe. It is sometimes called creation hymn, Srishti Suktam it is called. The ultimate, fundamental, the primitive cause of the universe. There was something which we cannot call existence in a purely empirical relative sense. Because in empirical relative sense, if you use the word existence, it means the opposite of non-existence. Something comes into existence. Means a transition from a state of non-existence into existence. That cannot be the fundamental final cause of the universe. At the same time, it cannot be non-existence, because from non-existence, an existing universe cannot emerge. So it is something beyond the so-called relative existence or non-existence. It is something beyond the indescribable, something beyond the senses. The idea of a reality that goes beyond the senses, beyond empirical perception, that is the beginning of all mystical ideas. Whether in Sufism or Buddhism or Catholic mysticism, though it was devotional mysticism, or in even in any Vedantic mysticism, the idea that there is something that remains when the whole universe no more existent, something that goes beyond the sensory perception, something which is trans-empirical, eternal. And the difference between a mystic philosopher and mystic devotee is, a mystic devotee attributes this transcendental existence to a creator God, which is actually a logical fallacy. But a mystic philosopher attributes this transcendental reality to an impersonal, eternal principle. That's what exactly Emerson is speaking about in the first stanza of the poem. See, they know not well the subtle ways. Ubhautau navijanitu. In the Sanskrit Gita verse, these two persons who define existence in terms of bodily existence, they do not know the true reality, the absolute reality. So I'm just giving an example how these ideas got transferred. Now, of course, all historians and biographers fully agree that Emerson had a very intimate knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita. It is now almost well established that there were two sources that explain Emerson's acquaintance with Gita. One source, which is not yet confirmed, is that he came to know of the lectures delivered in England by Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was the founder of Brahma Samaj, who came to England in the late 1829 and passed away in England in 1833. His statue is still found in London, little away, the place where he was buried, in a church. He came to England as a guest of the Unitarian Church. Unitarians had become very popular. The first Unitarian church in England was established in 1784. And in the same year, Gita was translated by Charles Wilkins into English and published in Calcutta, later in London. The British Governor General, Warren Hastings, arranged for the translation of Bhagavad Gita from Sanskrit directly into English. And he got a clerk who was in the service of East India Company, and encouraged him to learn Sanskrit. And with the help of some Sanskrit scholars, he translated Gita in English, which became very popular within a very short time. And it is said that Carlyle, the British socio-critic and historian, who was a very close friend of Emerson, who used to have close correspondence with Emerson till his passing away in 1882, gave him a gift. The gift was Charles Wilkins' translation of the Bhagavad Gita. This must have happened before 1830. So that's why from 1830s onwards, he started referring to these Vedantic mystical ideas in the journal. Now, of course, later on we know, I don't want to go into those details, how he influenced great transcendentalists. I mean, he was the founder, but other transcendentalists, more or less his disciples like Henry Thoreau and Walt Whitman and others. And later on, how in their turn they influenced George Santayana and other philosophers. So I won't go into those details. Now, some of the fundamental principles, philosophical ideas that distinguished Emerson from contemporary Western thinkers, except a few European thinkers like Schopenhauer and Max Muller, who came later, and other mainstream thinkers, was this. First, the belief in the eternal nature of an impersonal principle that goes beyond this bodily existence. And again, the continuity of human life and existence. The idea that there is a cause and effect relationship between our actions and the result and our life. Belief in reincarnation. Of course, the word karma, he called by the word compensation. I shall just read a very important quotation from his own writings on karma to drive home this idea. I was lately confirmed in these desires by hearing a sermon at church. Well, I'm coming to the subject. Now, the word karma is understood in popular traditional Hindu culture, was fully understood by Emerson. This becomes clear from some of his observations. Some of the ideas that emerge in his mind when he listened to a sermon in a church. I'm quoting his words. I was lately confirmed in these desires by hearing a sermon. At the beginning I will tell you. What happened? He went to a church, he listened to a sermon, and the preacher was telling the believers, now why do good people suffer? Why are they miserable? And why do the wicked people enjoy life in this world? So he was trying to console them. Look here. In next life, you will be able to enjoy. In this life, the wicked people suffer. They enjoy all the good things in life. And you suffer. So next life means after death, not in rebirth, reincarnation, which they didn't believe in. You will get everything plenty. That means it's a kind of exchange. So they were trying to interpret cause and effect in a very, very empirical sense. When I quote these words of Emerson, you will understand it very clearly. The preacher, a man esteemed for his orthodoxy, unfolded in the ordinary manner the doctrine of the last judgment. He assumed that judgment is not executed in this world, that the wicked are successful, that the good are miserable, and then urged from reason and from scripture a compensation to be made to both the parties in the next life. That means those who are enjoying wonderful things in this world, they will suffer in heaven. And those who are good, those good people who suffer here will be enjoying in heaven. So those who are enjoying heavenly comforts here, wicked people, luxurious life, they will suffer in hell. They will suffer perdition in hell. Those virtuous people, believers, who lead good life in this world but suffer, become miserable, or poor, or persecuted, they will be compensated. That's the word he uses. In next life, they will be enjoying in heaven. So he was giving a very empirical, mundane, worldly explanation that revolted Emerson. What did the preacher mean by saying that the good are miserable in the present life? Was it that house, the lands, offices, wine, horses, dress, luxury are had by unprincipled men while the saints are poor and despised? The preacher didn't understand that for the saints, these sufferings are not sufferings. For a devotee of God, problems and obstacles and poverty and asceticism are not problems. They are not problems. There are so many ways for them to make themselves fit for God's grace. That point was completely missed by the preacher. That's what Emerson is referring to. This must be the compensation intended. For what else? So he says, there is nothing to be worried about anything. For every result, there is a cause. There is this cause and effect relationship by which he said that there is no accident in life. Everything has a causal background, a background in the form of a cause. Just an example. I'm giving just an example. Now, there is an interesting quotation from the famous book American Veda by Philip Goldberg. According to him, of the three classic approaches to enlightenment outlined in the Bhagavad Gita, Jnana, Karma and Bhakti, respectively the parts of the intellect of action and devotion, Emerson's primary inclination was to Jnana, the yoga that emphasizes knowledge and discernment. One unique characteristic of Emerson was that he believed that we don't require a God to reveal the mystery of the absolute spiritual truth. God doesn't have to reveal his mystery through a book. Nature itself is a great open book. Nature itself is a sublime spiritual language. If you look at nature, the grandeur, the beauty, the sublimity of nature itself unfolds the sublimity and grandeur of its creation. But it was not pure pantheism, because in the primitive pantheistic system, empirical world, nature is equated to God, which is actually a kind of agnosticism or a mild form of atheism. But that was not Emerson's view. Emerson's combined the ancient Rigvedic pantheism with some kind of polytheistic views. I shall explain this. In the Rigveda Samhita, you find there are 5 levels in the evolution of the absolute reality or Godhead. The first stage is pantheism. Pantheism really means equating nature with God. It is not a very highly evolved understanding of the absolute reality. The rivers, mountains, oceans, you find Rigveda Samhita, Imamme, Gange, Yamune, Saraswati, Purushneya, Arjikhiya, like that. There are 10 rivers mentioned in the Rigveda Samhita. The 5 rivers that flow through Punjab, and also other rivers like Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, and so on. The mountains, the valleys, and rivers, all these are sometimes elevated to polytheistic deities in Vedic pantheism. At one level, Vedic pantheism is very primitive, equating the absolute reality to the external world, nature. At another level, it posits a divine principle behind natural phenomena. In the case of Emerson, you find a curious combination of primitive pantheism combined with Advaita philosophy. You know why I am referred to Advaita philosophy? Emerson did believe in God, but his idea of the absolute reality was something beyond that goes the function of a creatorship. That's why in this famous poem he talks about, they reckon ill who leave me out, when me they fly, I am the wings, I am the doubter and the doubt, I am the hymn the Brahmin sings. And again, in the poem, when he uses the word Brahma, there are 2 interpretations written by modern scholars. Some scholars interpret Emerson's Brahma with one of the trinities, Hindu trinities. Some scholars interpret Brahma as Brahman, the impersonal absolute principle. Well, I shall try to conclude, but I will explain later. Another occasion I will conclude. So, there are 2 interpretations. Brahma is the word Brahma, which is a long A vowel. Brahma, Brahmano, Brahmana. It is the first principle, the first deity in the Hindu Trinity. Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara. Brahma corresponds to creatorship, creation. Vishnu is the preservative deity, and Shiva is the one who is responsible for the dissolution of the world. So, but there again, Emerson's concept of cyclicism comes, coming and going. I mean, we are born, live, die, and reborn. In Hindu tradition, which Emerson must have been very familiar with from his reading of the Gita, creation is not making or manufacturing. God creates this world. It's no. Creation is not the creation of a new entity. Creation is nothing but the manifestation of the subtle in gross dimension. When the subtle appears to be gross, manifest as gross, it is called creation. That's why sometimes it's called projection. Swami Vivekananda, in one of his lectures, stressed this point. Creation in Vedanta doesn't mean you create something out of something else. No, creation means only like an iceberg, suddenly it becomes visible on the water surface. So maybe that the allegory comparison is not accurate. We cannot have a fully accurate comparison for any metaphysical principle. But creation means projection of the subtle in gross dimension. Preservation means it remains in the same manifested form. Dissolution doesn't mean destruction. Dissolution means the gross going back to its causal subtle form. This is called dissolution. So in Hindu Trinity, Brahma is the preservative principle, the one responsible for the projection of the subtle in gross dimension. And Vishnu is responsible for sustaining that in his present state. And Shiva corresponds to the principle of dissolution, by which the pralaya means the gross going back to its subtle or causal form. Now, assuming the role of Brahma, Emerson says that the entire universe is subjected to an eternal movement, flux, cyclicism. The idea that the universe doesn't move or progress or function in a straight line, but goes to a point and then vanishes from our view only to reappear at another point. This idea was altogether a new revolutionary idea in the landscape of American thought when Emerson wrote his poems. That's why sometimes it is a unique blending of the Eastern mysticism and Western tradition. So again, in the second verse, the juxtaposition of the opposites, that also is an attempt to explain the indescribable. To deny the reality, to deny the fact that to deny the describability of reality, the definability or the limitation of reality within definition. At the same time, to say that it is a reality that actually exists. These two ideas are put together to drive home the idea that absolute reality is beyond words, beyond description, beyond definition. So in a way, the ancient Upanishadic ideas we used to flow towards the West during the 5th and 6th centuries BC had got a new life when Emerson wrote these poems. The difference between Emerson on the one hand and Western European Indologists on the other hand was this. Emerson did not sit in a room and speculate and translate books. Whatever he believed, whatever he read, he tried to practice it. His whole life was, in a way, an attempt to practice what he understood to be the absolute reality. That's why you often find his life, the Concord movement, the way he influenced other thinkers of his times, all this show. You don't find a similar mystical movement in Europe influenced by Vedanta in 19th century. Max Muller, Paul Deussen, MacDonald, Winternitz, Keith, Ruth, innumerable great Indologists and Sanskrit scholars who were much more scholarly in their writings, much more steeped in Vedantic thought, and who made immense contribution by translating, by editing Vedas and all that. But still, you don't find a mystic element in either in a Max Muller or a Paul Deussen or a MacDonald or Keith or Winternitz, no. But in an Emerson, who was not a scholar in the same sense in which Paul Deussen was a scholar of Vedas, still he actually practiced this. That's what makes him a sage or a mystic. I shall just read a few lines from the same book, which gives an outline of his influence in modern American tradition, philosophical tradition. Every American who checks the spiritual but not religious box or shuffles off to a meditation retreat is squarely in the transcendentalist lineage. The author, Philip Goldberg, says that anybody in America who goes to a retreat center, who goes to a meditation center, and who tries to contemplate on the eternal, away from the mainstream dogmatic, ritualistic religious tradition, is in the footstep of Emerson himself. That is his view. Because it was a transcendentalist movement that he started, which actually introduced this idea into America's cultural and philosophical landscape. A surprising number of the people I interviewed, when recalling the origins of their interest in Eastern philosophy, named Emerson or Thoreau as a catalyst. This was especially true of those who came of age during that unruly period between John F. Kennedy's assassination and Richard Nixon's designation. The author says that today far greater number of people, Americans, go to meditation centers than they used to go to Concord due to Emerson's lecture bureaus, lecture sessions during his lifetime. In a neat bit of karmic reciprocity, Emerson's work bounced back to India even during his lifetime. While the colonial British were still very much in control of the jewel in its crown, literate Indians rejoiced to discover that America's sage cherished their sacred text. Hindu reformers quoted him. The Nobel Prize-winning writer of India, Rabindranath Tagore, told an American journalist, "I love your Emerson. In his work, one finds much that is of India. In truth, he made the teachings of our spiritual leaders and philosophical systems a part of his life." So it was that Emerson used India to formulate his philosophy, and India used Emerson to legitimize his ancient wisdom to the modern mind. As I said earlier, Emerson got this precious jewel indirectly from Charles Wilkins, also maybe Schopenhauer. But through these channels, the ancient Vedantic ideals got a great exponent and real practitioner on American soil. So both enrich itself. So I was just giving an example of how great mystical ideas, philosophical ideas, sometimes get re-established maybe after several centuries. It's a mystery that happens today. The popularity of Buddhism in today's America, Vedanta, all these great yoga, all these ideas which must have gone to Greece in the 4th or 3rd century BC and then was completely lost due to the theological dogmatism, got re-established in modern times. I would try to give a few more lectures in future focusing on Emerson's works and how he re-echoes the ancient Vedantic wisdom in his works and essays. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna.